you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that we'll link those in the chat as a reminder to folks that we are a C3 organization and that we work on issues and not candidates. So that's always very important for us to say as we kind of move into these conversations. And thank you, Lauren, for sharing some of that information in the chat. And with that, I will move into a bit of more of the program for today. I know last time we had Jamie a way longer introduction and we want today to be short, so you get the time to be with folks and to be in conversation. So we'll hear from Jamie Manson today, who is the president of Catholics for Choice. And I'm just so excited for folks to be able to have the opportunity to hear directly from when it comes to these issues, who's such an amazing leader in the movement for reproductive rights and faith at the intersection of so many other issues that are important for communities across the country. So we're just excited to have Jamie. I will go ahead and pass it to Jamie. And after that, we will have a Q&A with Jamie. So if you have questions, Jamie will take those at the very end of her presentation. And then like last time, we'll have a call to action and we will have a blessing before we leave and kind of wrap it up at 7. So that's our plan for today. If you have any questions about what we're here to do, let us know in the chat. And if you have any technical kind of difficulties also, let Nicole is your person. So Nicole, if you want to wave real quick, and definitely reach out to Nicole. Thank you for that support, Nicole. Without further ado, Jamie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steph. It's such a pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving us an hour of your evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm so thrilled. This is one of my favorite things to do at Catholics for Choice, is teach this section of the Advocate's Bible. So as Steph said, we'll do a Q&A afterwards. You can pop the questions in the chat. That would be great. And we will answer them as best. I'll answer them as best I can. So thanks so much. Let me just get the share my screen. Do that thing that's challenging for Gen Xers. Okay, great. And now I have to do one more thing. I think I had to do a slideshow. Oh, I had it before. Good grief. Hang on, everybody. Okay. Where did the slideshow? Okay, here it is. Woo. Okay, thank goodness we survived. Hardest part is over. So thank you so very much again for being here. I'm going to teach a particular section of the Advocate's Bible. I used to have the pages. I forgot what they are now. But if someone wants to pop them in the chat, that would be fantastic. I used to know that. And away we go. Okay, away we go. Okay, so I like to start this particular training with some statistics. Some people think statistics don't change minds. I have found that to actually not be the case, especially with Catholics. So let's take a look. 1 in 4 abortion patients identifies as Catholic. That means that people who are sitting around us in the pews, who are offering us the Eucharist, who are lecturing at Mass, who are teaching in Sunday school, they are having abortions. And as you know, they're hearing a message from their priests that they are complicit in very grave sin. And so this number is one I hope you really take to heart, because this number for me symbolizes a real pastoral crisis in our church and a real situation of the spiritual violence of language being levied against women and other Catholics who have chosen abortion without ever being listened to. And so this is one I really, really take to heart, because Catholics who have abortions are participating richly in the life of the church, and they're being treated with profound shame and silence. 64% of Catholics think abortion should be legal in all or most cases, so that's a majority. 68% did not want to see Roe versus. Actually, this number, I should have corrected this. This number used to be 13%, and in the last 6 months, PRRI has reported that, in fact, only 8% of Catholics think abortion should be illegal in all cases, no exceptions. That idea is the official stance of the Catholic Church, which is that it should be illegal in all cases, no exceptions for assault, for if the pregnant person is in danger. All of it, none of these cases can someone have an abortion. And so there is such a profound disagreement among even conservative Catholics about that. It's a step too far. Grief. Okay, so let's talk about this falsehood that anti-choice Catholics put out. The constant refrain is that life begins at conception, and that teaching is unchanged and unchangeable. When in fact, an examination of the history of Catholic thinking throughout the centuries on abortion tells us otherwise, and in fact reveals quite a few inconsistencies and unresolved questions. So let's take a quick look at some of the history, some of our scripture and our tradition around this issue. Okay, let's talk about what is true. What is true is there is no mention of abortion in the Bible. This is really important. I hear people say it's in the Bible. It's not there. There is only something somewhat adjacent to an issue of a pregnancy lost, and that is in Exodus, in which a pregnant woman is knocked over and she has a miscarriage. And so there's a adjudication around this issue. And in fact, what it shows, what the scripture says, is that the value is on the life of the woman, and that the pregnancy is not seen as a person. So even in that case, that reaffirms that there is no ban on abortion in scripture. And this is one of the reasons why Jews, by and large, believe abortion is permissible, and in fact that life begins at the first breath. So no mention of abortion in the Bible, but there are 30 mentions of conscience in the Bible, and I will talk more about why that is significant later. What is in the Bible is that Mary had a choice. This is really important. We see it right in our scripture in the Gospel according to Luke, when the angel Gabriel appears to the young teenager Mary. It is very clear that the angel makes this announcement, you will bear a son and all this, but Mary very clearly has this moment to say, let it be so. And so that's a really, really important thing that we often gloss over in our own, one of the most important scriptures for Christians. And so we hold on to that truth. So the history of Catholic teaching on abortion is complicated, of course. But what is really important to remember is that no teaching on abortion you are about to hear throughout the history of the church was developed, influenced, or articulated by someone who had a uterus. This is very important because these are teachings that cause women and trans and non-binary people who are able to get pregnant, cause them profound suffering, even unto death. And yet they have had no voice and no decision-making power in the development of these doctrines. Always a caveat I like to share. In the early church, the debate was really not about whether or not abortion was. I'm going to use some language that I apologize if it's triggering. This is the language that we have in the theological tradition, but whether or not it was homicide. this was never the question in the early church. It was more abortion as a sexual sin, because it's somehow undoing the sin of having sex outside of marriage, typically. And the big question really for the early church was, does this fetus become ensouled immediately or later in gestation, or later in development? St. Augustine, who weighed in on many, many things having to do with sex and sexuality, and we still pay the price to this day, had some interesting thoughts about this. He is the well, first of all, he's the man who developed the notion of original sin, and he is also the person that developed this notion that we now know as the procreative norm, which says, namely, that God intended the purpose of sex to be procreation, and therefore, and the church still teaches this today, all acts of sexual intercourse must be open to life, must be open or have the possibility of creating life, as they would say. That's why only sexual intercourse is the only kind of sex actually permissible, according to the Catholic Church. A lot of people don't realize that. So use your imagination on how many things you can't do according to this procreative norm. But this is Augustine who had this idea, because Augustine, especially later in his life, thought that sex was irredeemably sinful. And the only thing that could kind of make it okay was the fact that it can result in procreation. This is why, to this day, the church condemns birth control. And in Augustine's, in some theologians' case, including Augustine later, in later gestation, which I'll explain in a minute, they violate the purpose of sex, which is to always be open to the creation of life. So for Augustine, abortion is a sexual sin because it's violating the purpose of sex. So Augustine doesn't think abortion is homicide. He says that this is a sexual sin. And the only reason you would have to make an act of contrition for an abortion is because of the sexual nature. Also, that life did not begin at conception. That actual human life began sometime well into gestation, after the fetus has developed along a certain number of weeks or months. He really didn't specify, but he did say this. He said, unformed fetuses perish like seeds which have not become fruit. And so this is his way of indicating that an early gestation, that this is something that could perish, like a seed would. So certainly he's not seeing this as a person in early gestation. Delayed harmonization, very fancy word. This was the way theologians thought about this question of when a fetus became ensouled or received a soul. Did this notion of delayed harmonization meaning becoming ensouled. This is another word for ensoulment, and that this happened later in pregnancy. That was the prevailing belief among theologians in the Catholic tradition. They based this on Aristotelian science, so the work of Aristotle, and it was based on genital development. So according to Aristotle's science, and his own study of embryology and his own studies of fetuses, the male genitalia would develop at 40 days. And so that was when males got a soul. Female genitalia didn't develop until 80 to 90 days. And so that's when females got a soul. So I always like to say that, once again, it's all about the penis. And even your soul, according to this Aristotelian science, when you get a soul, is determined by whether or not you have male anatomy. The other great theologian of the Middle Ages is Thomas Aquinas, and he had a lot to say also about abortion, and some of it might surprise you. He said, like Augustine and many theologians of the day, that abortion and contraception were sins against marriage, right? Because again, the purpose of the conjugal act, the marriage act, as they would say, is procreation. He did not think abortion could be deemed homicide until ensoulment. And he thought the soul had several stages: a vegetative stage, an animal stage, and a human stage. He had this idea, different from Augustine. He thought the body and the soul were one. And so for him, a soul could only be present in a body that was capable of receiving it. And so as the fetus goes through these different stages of growth, it's only when it becomes that human stage that it can receive a soul, because that's how deeply unified he thought body and soul were. So again, these are much more nuanced, different, teachings and understandings of the issue of abortion than we have in the church teaching today. So what happened? So how did the popes get involved? The only time before 1873, the only time that there was a total condemnation of abortion, like we know it today, was for 3 short years, starting in 1588. The Pope at the time was Sixtus V. That's him there on your screen. And he declared that abortion and contraception. Why did he do that? Historians say he was very concerned about the rise of sex work or prostitution in Rome. And he thought that, well, if I say there's a total ban and they think that, oh God, they're going to be excommunicated and go to hell, if they use contraceptives or abortion, that these penalties would somehow keep people from committing these acts. And so if you committed one of these acts, used contraception or had an abortion, you had to go to the Holy See, you had to go to the Vatican itself to have your excommunication absolved. Well, this created a bureaucratic nightmare for the Vatican, because that's how many people were using contraceptives and having abortions. When Sixtus died 3 years later, Gregory XIV became Pope, and he immediately went back to that original idea of delayed harmonization. He determined 166 days of pregnancy. There's almost 24 weeks. He thought Sixtus V was being much too harsh, that he was conflicting with the prevailing theological views that had been taught for centuries about ensoulment. And again, this excommunication created such a bureaucratic nightmare and administrative difficulties for the Vatican, who was constantly having to adjudicate these excommunication cases and determine whether or not these people could be back in communion with the church. Gregory XIV thought that there was not homicide if the fetus was animated, and again, he thought that happened much later in gestation. Now, when Gregory says this in 1591, that is the last time the Vatican or any pope makes a pronouncement on abortion until 1869. 1869. The church does not declare that total ban until 1869. And it's very interesting what was going on at the time that the Catholic Church decided to make this total ban on abortion. Things were going on in the world contemporaneously that really should be paid attention to. One of them was the rise of suffrage. And I wonder often, is this a coincidence? Suffrage was becoming a real struggle in England. And then a few years later, the struggle came to the United States. And so obviously, women were demanding a form of equal rights. And anytime women demand a form of equal rights, the Vatican gets scared. That is why we had a total ban on women's ordination that came from John Paul II in the late 1970s, because the Episcopal Church started ordaining women. Catholic women thought they were next. There was every sign to indicate they were. And that is why you had that formulation of this total ban that came later. He started to develop it in the early 80s, and the total ban came in the mid 90s. So this is happening. And one wonders, as women began to find their own freedom, their own voice, their own, entitlement to equality, if there wasn't a push somehow to control, because when a woman controls her own fertility, she also gets access to greater independence, freedom, economic power, social power, political power, and that is an existential threat to the church to this day. What was also happening was this guy, Comstock. We hear this name a lot more these days because since Roe fell, Anthony Comstock was a postal inspector in the United States, and he was horrified by some of the mail he was seeing come through, mail that was very flagrantly advertising abortifacients, contraceptives. There was not always a ban on abortion in the United States. There was actually talked about quite openly, especially among white Protestant women and those communities that were more financially secure. And so Comstock was horrified and created this what is now known as the Comstock Law. He marched right over to Washington, D.C. and said to Congress, you have to make this into a law. This is an outrage. And so what he said was, anything that was he considered obscene, an obscene book, a pamphlet, an advertisement, any article about the prevention of conception or causing or abortifacient, something that would cause an abortion. You can't advertise these. You can't write or print any circular or pamphlet stating about this. You'll be imprisoned for hard labor for not less than 6 months and no more than 5 years for each offense, because he was horrified at the libertine nature that women were beginning to have, being open about their sexuality, being open about trying to control their fertility. Some of these Comstock laws are still on the books in certain states. And that's why when Roe fell, a number of states fell right back to their original Comstock laws some of them date back to the earliest 20th century. You will not be surprised the Catholic Church in the United States absolutely endorsed Comstock. He was not Catholic himself, but the bishops really, really loved this idea. And this is where this real purity, contraception and abortifacients really took over in the United States. And it's contemporaneously the same thing is happening with the Catholic Church when they do their own ban. The Vatican finally speaks rather definitively about abortion in 1974. What it does is it declares the fetus as a human being from the moment of conception. It talks about a theology of the dignity of all human life. What it doesn't do is define when ensoulment happens. And yet, even though the church has stated this in 1974, I meet many Catholic couples who suffered a stillbirth, who were utterly abandoned by their church. And so while this is the teaching, in practice, when people have a real pastoral crisis with a stillbirth or a late miscarriage or some sort of abandons them. And so this teaching does not always play out in pastoral practice by the church. That suggests to me that the church is making some distinctions implicitly of what is and what is not a human being. Pope Francis, my holy conundrum. He has restated multiple times that abortion at any time in fetal development is homicide. He has likened, even just a year and a half ago, he likened having an abortion to hiring a hitman. So this man, who's known for his pastoral sensibilities and his desire to encounter and listen with humility, uses some of the most escalated, what I would call spiritually violent language around abortion, which is very interesting. Now, the conundrum is in 2015, he had the extraordinary year, Jubilee Year of Mercy. And in that year, he made a change and he allowed priests to use penance for women who had had abortions to take away their excommunication. Because when you have an abortion, it's an automatic excommunication. It's not like a bishop comes down and excommunicates you. It's an automatic excommunication you do to yourself. It's called late sententiae. And so what Francis did was he was like, I'm for this year of mercy, I'm going to allow priests to just forgive. If someone comes contrite about their abortion, a priest can just forgive them and they can be back in communion with the church. And a year later, when the year of mercy ended, he made that permanent policy in his apostolic letter, Mercy, and it was called Mercy and Misery. Or it's really misericordia in Latin. Misery makes it sound much worse, but it's misericordia is more suffering. So again, very, very complicated person. If you were watching Catholics for Choice, when I was in Rome a few weeks ago, I brought abortion stories to the Vatican because I was calling for, in the same way the church in the synod was trying to listen to women who are seeking equality and seeking ordination, to LGBTQ people who are seeking a just and inclusive church, I was asking the church to listen to people who have had abortions, because we know so many Catholics have had them. And the church's teaching on it is devastating. So I was calling on the church to listen with humility to abortion stories. We will see what happens if we're successful. So all of these, the reason I go into this detail about the church's teaching is that it brings up so many unresolved questions. Number one, the teaching on abortion has never been declared infallible. Even by John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, they excommunicated any Catholic who supports abortion rights. Some bishops do it individually. You might remember a few months ago, Archbishop Cordileone in San Francisco excommunicated then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi but only from his diocese. They call that placing someone under interdict, and he did that. She could receive communion elsewhere. But the Vatican itself has never formally excommunicated anyone for supporting abortion rights. The church has never definitively said when a fetus receives a soul. Theologians admit that we do not know when a fetus becomes a human being. The church's teaching has changed, as you just saw from that brief survey, and it can change again. And I think what that indicates is there is still need for clarification of the church's position. So how do we make a case for abortion access, a Catholic case for supporting abortion access? One of the first things I'm going to go to the next slide quick, and then I'll try to pop back to this one. It can take up to 2 weeks to become pregnant after sex. What happens is you'll see the egg is released from the ovary. Fertilization happens when the sperm meets that egg or ovum. Then the fertilized ovum goes on a journey through the fallopian tube, and eventually it descends into the uterus. And if it's a success, the only way pregnancy can happen is if that fertilized ovum, that fertilized egg, the embryo, then after it's fertilized, it's called an embryo, attaches into the lining of the uterus. And so this is called implantation. That's when pregnancy actually begins. You will not get a positive pregnancy test until you have an embryo that has successfully implanted into the lining of uterus. This can take, as you say, day 6 to 12. It could take up to 12 days, almost 2 weeks, to actually get pregnant. Now, why is this important? Science has told us that embryo, before it implants, 60 to 70% of these fertilized eggs are naturally washed out of the body. So the majority of them never implant. What the church is saying is that they were life, that was a person, and yet it gets washed out of the body. So what does that say? If God is the author of nature, and everything in nature, the church says, is God's natural law, what does that say about natural law? If there's that much destructive, if by God's design, there is that much destruction of what the church is now considering human life and a person. It's a really important question that the church needs to reckon with. And again, it opens up questions and possibilities for discussion in a church that absolutely refuses any discussion or dissent on this issue or any questioning. Okay, so in addition to challenging that teaching, we have 3 guiding principles. And I think if you were in the last session, they went over them briefly. I'll go into them with a little bit more depth. The first is conscience. That's Thomas Aquinas, who was one of the best articulators of the theology of conscience. What he said was, when conscience conflicts with the law, whether it's law, if it's law, civil law, or church law, he said that acting against one's conscience is always a sin. So he opened up the possibility that you could, in good conscience, disagree with church teaching or with civil law. And he said not to go with what your conscience is telling you, this God-given conscience that's part of God's gift of reason to human beings. To go against it means second-guessing your own human capacity for freedom of choice. And if you second-guess your own capacity for freedom of choice, you are, in a sense, denying your own human dignity. So this is very strong language that Aquinas uses for how important conscience is. That idea gets translated over to the Catechism of the Catholic Church to this day. This is on the books in Canon 1778. We call this the primacy of individual conscience. I made that. This is language taken directly from the Catechism. Please know that I made the language gender inclusive. It is not gender inclusive. It's in its original version. But what it says is that conscience is a judgment of reason, whereby the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act that they are going to perform, are in the process of performing, or have already completed. Is obliged to follow faithfully what they know to be just and right. That's right in the Catechism. So again, reaffirming that primacy of individual conscience. Religious freedom. This is really important. In the Second Vatican Council, the church produced an entire declaration on the importance of religious freedom. It was a whole renewed interest in it in the Second Vatican Council, and a whole new push to honor religious pluralism within societies. And so essentially, what our Constitution says, and really what this respect for religious pluralism says, is that religious freedom means the freedom for me to be protected to practice my own beliefs. But it also means my right to be free of the beliefs of others. And what we're seeing happening with these abortion bans and restrictions is that Catholic theological ideas about life beginning at conception are most religious traditions actually support abortion rights, certainly at certain stages of gestation. As I said earlier, for Jews, it is not only it allowed, and there are circumstances in which abortion is actually required. And so abortion bans and restrictions, in effect, infringe on the religious freedom of other people of faith. For whom this is not a theological idea, and also people of no faith who have no theological ideas about this and just want care and basic human rights. So this should be taken very seriously by Catholics, because it's part of our teaching, this notion of religious freedom and the freedom of one group's religious beliefs not impinging on the rights of others. Last principle we use is the Catholic social tradition. That holds. This is, for some people call it the great, the best kept secret of the Catholic tradition. Other people call it the crown jewel of the Catholic theological tradition. But it holds that we are supposed to have a preferential option for the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. And the reality is that abortion bans and restrictions disproportionately impact people who are already suffering, whether that's from poverty, lack of education, people who are in states of profound powerlessness, they're in situations of domestic violence, people who are in rural areas, people who are disabled. They're always going to be the ones who disproportionately suffer with these bans and restrictions. And so that is another reason why the church really has to reckon with this, how it exacerbates sufferings that are already present, and sufferings that come as a result of structural sin generally. Let's talk briefly about the effects of abortion bans and restrictions, because this really, I think, explains why this is such a critical social justice issue. In 2020, Diana Green Foster published a study, a 10-year study called the Turnaway Study, 10 years, 1,000 women, and the consequences of having or being denied an abortion. If you haven't seen this book, please do get a copy. And if you don't have time to read, please listen to Diana Green Foster. She did an amazing interview on NPR's Fresh Air 3 years ago now when the book came out. It is an extraordinary listen. What she found, and I'm sorry about that, I know the print is very small here. These are she wanted to see what the consequences were of being denied a wanted abortion and being given access to a wanted abortion. So for those who received a wanted abortion, they were more likely to set and achieve aspirational career and life goals. They were more likely to have better physical health, have no short or long-term emotional or mental health consequences. And those who received a wanted abortion, when the time was right for them, they were better able to care for those children that they already had, because 61% of people who have abortions are already parents. People don't realize that. The majority of people who have abortions are already parents. Those who were denied a wanted abortion were more likely to be financially insecure and living in poverty years later, along with their children. So the parent and family are living, and children are living in poverty. They are more likely to have serious physical health problems related to carrying an unwanted pregnancy. They report more anxiety, higher stress, worse self-esteem in the short term. And they also have trouble bonding with their babies. And their older children tend to have worse developmental and economic outcomes. One very sad question is that Diana Green Foster said, do you feel happy when you see your baby smile? And those who are denied a wanted abortion, often the majority say no. So it's very, very heartbreaking what happens. What she said, this is from that Fresh Air interview that I mentioned a minute ago. What she says to Fresh Air is that there is more at stake than just a woman's bodily autonomy and the well-being of a fetus who will become a baby. It's not just her body, but her whole life trajectory, her chance of having a wanted baby later, her chance of having a good, positive, romantic relationship, and her chance of supporting herself and her family. The ability to access abortion affects these women's existing children and the well-being of their future children. This is a very important, I love this point that she makes, because she talks about abortion not just as a single moral issue, but something that affects the totality of a person's life, every level of their future, of their health, of their destiny is impacted by whether or not they are allowed to they have the ability to make this choice. This this idea that Diana Green Foster shares really complements the notion of reproductive justice. I'm going to give you a quick tour of what reproductive justice is. Sometimes we throw that word around a lot, but it actually has a very particular meaning. It's a framework that was created in 1994 by 12 Black women because they were at an event about healthcare with the Clinton administration, and they were listening to a lot of white women talk about maternal health. And they said, this has nothing to do with Black women's experience. And so they said, we have to make our own framework, that the rights framework that white women were working out of was not adequate to address the challenges faced particularly by women of color. And so their framework is actually, there's 3 tenets: the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, and the right to nurture children in safe and healthy environments. So what this framework does is take abortion out of the realm of choice and makes it much more, integrates it into questions about access. Loretta Ross, who's one of the 12 Black women who created this framework, very often says, what good are choices for women who have no choice? And so it's really something we have to listen to. And so what's so striking for Catholics, particularly about reproductive justice, is that the same issues that reproductive justice advocates are concerned about and fighting for are almost a perfect overlap with the issues that Catholics who are very invested in social justice are also really committed to. What are those issues? Here's right now. So it's Catholic social justice principles. Let's take a look at them. There are these 7 principles: human dignity, family, community, participation, care for creation, concern for the poor, rights and responsibilities, workers' rights, and solidarity. And the values of the reproductive justice framework. And I think there's a real opportunity here for Catholics to understand and appreciate the reproductive justice framework in a very special way. If they could understand that what reproductive justice is taking in the totality of the person, and reproductive justice sees issues like immigration rights, economic justice, labor rights, healthcare rights, all these things Catholics care so much about. They see these also as reproductive justice issues. So if Catholics can start to see all the issues that Catholic social justice activists can see how much intersection there is between reproductive freedom, reproductive justice, and their causes, I think it could be a really powerful opportunity for us to find a lot of mutual strengths. So one more slide for you. I think one thing we also need to do, and we're talking to Catholics about abortion. Again, it's a very fraught issue. Catholics have been plagued by 50 years of misinformation, of manipulative imagery, and from a Catholic Church that has completely dominated the narrative about abortion and the idea that you can't be Catholic and support abortion rights. We have ceded that narrative to the right wings of Catholicism for too long, and we have to take it back. But to do that, I think we need to honor the fact that for many people, abortion is a morally complex issue. And how can it be? Pregnancy is complicated, pregnancy loss, premature birth, complications in delivery, all of that, anything having to do with gestation and delivery are complicated. And those experiences color our imagination of the issue of abortion. And so I think that this movement for abortion access needs to be able to start to admit and make space for people for whom does not mean stigma. It shouldn't mean stigma. It just means an opportunity for encounter, for education, like we're doing tonight, so people really understand the full picture of what's going on and are able to make their own space for discernment about this issue that affects so many Catholics, and so many people, in a profound justice issue. And so that's what we're trying to do at Catholics for Choice is give the information, make the space for that kind of discernment, create that safe space for people to bring questions and do the real discernment, that the spaces that we don't get in a very, very polarized environment like abortion is in the United States. So just a few notes on shifting away from this notion. When we think about abortion, it's always about the pregnant person having to justify why they had the abortion. Was it a good abortion? Was it a bad abortion? What was it? We have to shift away from that justification framework when we talk about abortion. The starting point should be that pregnant person's life, not the decision to terminate the pregnancy. If you listen to anti-choice rhetoric, they automatically go to start talking about what they call late-term abortion. That's immediate. They do that for the moral imagination, when in fact only 1.3% of abortions are done after 21 weeks, and 93% of abortions are done at 12 weeks or less. And so be very aware of how quickly they jump to these very graphic, gory images of abortion, to really manipulate the imagination. What they also do is watch how quickly they completely ignore, dismiss the value of the person carrying the pregnancy. You never, ever hear, they don't focus on the pregnant person. In fact, the pregnant person becomes a vessel, and the pregnant person's life is somehow less than, the living, breathing woman who's carrying this pregnancy. Her life becomes less valuable than the potential theoretical life that the anti-choice movement talks about. And so watch how quickly the existence, the life, the experience of the pregnant person is dismissed. Again, being aware not to reduce this to a binary right or wrong. It's not adequate for a morally complex issue like this. And perhaps the most essential question that we have to ask ourselves, because the ban on abortion access is deeply rooted in a very misogynistic theology of the Catholic Church that says that women are not capable of making decisions, women are not capable of authority, women are not capable of leadership. Remember, that's why the Catholic Church does not ordain women, because only men are capable of authority and leadership and decision-making power. And so one of the key questions we have to ask ourselves is, do you trust that a woman is a moral agent capable of making decisions about her life? If you say yes to that question, yes, I believe a woman is capable of making moral decisions about her life, then you have a pro-choice value. And that's a common belief that we can start to build upon as we dialogue and we discern this issue. I'll leave it there. I gave you a lot of information. And I want to thank you so much for your attention. And I'd be very, very happy to take your questions at this point.
Thank you, Jamie, so much. So I am just so grateful. Like I mentioned, Jamie has been a thought leader and an advocate in this field in the public square generally. And actually, Jamie just returned from Rome, from the Vatican, where she was wondering if there are some questions for Jamie. I'm also conscious of the time, but definitely want to make sure. No, it's good, Jamie. You're good. That was excellent. So wanting to ensure that if there's a couple of questions, this is a great time to raise your hand and ask your question.
Or you can pop it in the chat.
Yeah, also pop it in the chat for sure. Oh yeah, we had Olivia ask that if we could repeat the specific stat. The 1.3 of abortions are after how many weeks?
21 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a Guttmacher statistic, the Guttmacher Institute, which maintains all of this research. And the latest statistic from them is 93%. I think that there are a lot of people who would do it if it were easily accessible. You know, Republicans talk a lot about the European standard as 15 weeks, 15-week ban. That's why we want a 15-week ban. Well, in Europe, and not all of Europe, to be fair, Poland is a total ban, Malta, there's a total ban, but most European countries, it's free. Abortion care is free. It's totally accessible. It's easy to get. That makes a massive impact on this issue.
Thank you, Jamie. Any additional questions?
I'll be brave. So I don't know is this supposed to go an hour or do we not have an hour?
Yeah, I was bad and I talked too much, Sherry. I apologize, but we're supposed to end at 7.
Oh, we are?
Yeah.
Oh, I had it from 6:30 to 7:30. I must have gotten it wrong. Sorry.
No worries. Please tell me your question.
Well, I just want to first say I admire you and this organization so much. I recently discovered it just a few months ago because I was struggling so much with my Catholic faith and, not following all the teachings of the church and I feel like definitely feel that conservative bent. And I have, I don't feel the community that I used to feel because of what happened with Roe versus Wade. I think there's fear of, talking to people, but yet people will make offhanded comments and then, oh, they're one of me, they're one of us, but it's hard because there are conservatives and, I cantor in the church and I love the liturgy, but it's just like, I can't reckon like this. I can't, but ne'er the two shall meet. I mean, I volunteer and escort people I'm in North Carolina. So I escort people into clinics because we have protesters and everything. It's like, well, if somebody shows up for my church, they're just going to see me. But I think there's just fear of speaking out and like what's going to happen and, how you approach that with people, I don't know if there's like an elevator pitchers. I don't know. It's just, but I'm getting to the point where I'm just like, well, I can't keep silent. I can't, you know, it's hard. Anyway, I guess that's my question of how do you, how do you navigate, how do you navigate that with people, and people that you've been friends with or acquainted with?
And especially the fear, right, of losing ministries, losing community. I wonder if Steph wants to speak to that, because it's a big part of Steph's, I will call it a ministry at CFC. So Steph, do you want to?
I just want to folks that we talk to every day. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that we think about Catholicism very expansively. People who still go to mass, people who cannot show up anymore because it's a place that they no longer feel like safe and welcome. So I don't have an concrete answer about the elevator pitch, but I just want you to know that you're not alone, that we talk to so many folks like you in that situation, that one of the reasons why we have the Advocates Bible Study is to share a sense of community amongst pro-choice Catholics. And I just shared a link to my Calendly. So I would love to have a one-on-one conversation. We can go a little bit more in depth about what are some of those conversations you want to be having with folks, and just make sure that you feel equipped to be emboldened to speak up and to take action in a way that feels meaningful to you and in your community. So it's easy. Just schedule some time with me. There's a 30-minute slots. And actually, that's an invitation for everyone. We had a couple of folks here, and folks that are not here couldn't join us, that had a conversation with us in the last 2 weeks. And they've been all great. Nicole, Lauren, all of the team has been doing those. And we're just so grateful, and encourage everyone to sign up for those conversations with us. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I also see some crew from Ohio that I want to give a shout out to, and just remind folks that we have Nicole here with us, who's our Ohio field organizer. We've been doing some deep work in that state in preparation for issue 1, from in-person outreach to billboards to media presence to equipping pro-choice Catholics to leave postcards in their pews, to so much work that we've been doing. So if you get a chance, reach out to Nicole, and we'll love to be connected with you as well.
I have a question about what did I say? I think I decided to teach 2nd grade PSR this year as a way of like directly countering some of the things I'm hearing from the pulpit. I live in like mixed, very traditionally Catholic community, with also a lot of pretty liberal Catholics who seem to send their kids to PSR and might not go to church otherwise, right? And I was having a conversation with the person who runs the PSR program. Don't know his actual position of if we have events to pray the rosary for, abortions or pro-life rosary gatherings, like why are we having like rosary prayers for, just pregnant mothers, just for them, like to choose what is best for them, like some counter to the pray the rosary for life like narrative. Because praying the rosary for life like means one very specific thing, despite the word choice of that statement. And we had a Eucharistic adoration for against abortion or something like this, and I went up to the priest. It was a very difficult moment, but I went up to the priest and I said, I cannot attend Eucharistic adoration because it is fundamentally against, right, like you said, like women's ability to make the right decision for themselves.
Mhm.
As much as I love Eucharistic adoration, like I am not allowed to worship in my church because of the qualifications you're putting on worshiping. And so like what churches are doing this in a more like I feel compelled to come up with not just bitching about what I'm not happy about, right? But what can I do to like actively try to organize something? And what if my priest says no, that they won't stand for me organizing that? Then you're homeless, right? And it's that same narrative of I don't feel safe raising my opinion because what if I guess we have a church here that has female priests, like an unordained church. And the guy that runs PSR was like, yeah, if the priest found out you went there, he would like excommunicate you. And I just thought the whole idea of being able to be excommunicated from the church seems so anathema to the teaching of the gospel that like this is the problem. And I think that's how then I started just Googling like liberal Catholic groups or something. Like, so if there are ideas of how to organize alternative versions of um, worship types that are still within the community, I don't know if that who does those, how they're done, how they're talked about, how they're pitched, because me going in and getting all emotional about it, right? It's like if I'm yelling, I've already.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll love to chat more. And like I mentioned, there's a link for us to have a more in-depth conversation. So I hope that folks sign up for that. I saw that Olivia and her crew is also in Ohio. So hopefully you also reach out. We're happy to provide more information for your parents, or any information you might need in preparation for Tuesday's election. So we're a little bit past 7 p.m. I just want to thank you all for being here, for your thoughtful participation. Thank you so much, Jamie, for your continued leadership. So holding the people of Ohio who are here, and just like the people of everywhere, just want to have a final blessing for us, but definitely very present to what is at stake on Tuesday, and ensuring that this, whatever happened on Tuesday, but grows. It doesn't matter how, what way it goes, our continued commitment remains. So just wanted to let you all know that. And if you all will allow for that, I have a blessing for us to close our time in community together. So we just take a deep breath. And we pray in the name of the Creator, the Son, the Teacher, and the Holy Spirit. This evening, as we continue to be transformed by a season of learning, we ask that we too might be transformed by this time to learn as a community, by the witness of each other in our different spaces. We ask that your spirit of wisdom walk with us, opening our hearts to the encountering that is possible when God's beloveds gather in the name of justice. We pray this in the name of Jesus, who frequently gathered with his friends and disciples to teach and to learn. Amen. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and we really hope you join us for session 3 in 2 weeks. So hopefully we'll see you very soon. Take good care.